Thank you for showing up. I think it's been a very intense day, a lot of really good material. I'm happy to be back at Platform Summit. Last time I was here 2019, and it's a pleasure to be back. So thank you very much for your attention. My name is Ivan. I'm going to talk about real estate and buildings. I usually talk about APIs. I usually evangelize APIs in real estate events because I've spent the last 20 years working for the real estate industry. But today, I'm going to bring the topic of real estate into the tech conference and talk about how APIs help buildings learn. I stole this title from a guy called Stuart Brand. And I'm pretty sure that very few of you heard of that name. He used to be a hero to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, in 2005, in his address to the students, referred to Whole Earth catalog. And his famous words with which he ended the speech were, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." And these words were printed on the back cover of the Whole Earth catalog, which by definition of Steve Jobs, used to be the internet before the internet, or the Bible of his generation, as he called it. And it was a collection of tools and knowledge about the earth and about human evolution, about technology. It was very popular among geeks and tech people. So it was put together by Stuart Brand. And the reason why I bring him up is because he's the guy I stole the name of my presentation from. In 1992, he wrote a book called How Buildings Learn. And he dedicated that book to the question of what happens to buildings after they are built, after they have been commissioned and put into operation. And in that book, Stuart Brand discusses the relationship of people and buildings, and how buildings adapt to our changing needs, to unforeseen uses and functions. And we've all seen, we've evidenced how our attitude towards the built environment changed during the pandemic times. And so we see a lot of changing behaviors and preferences, and we want to understand how we as tech people can help buildings adapt to change. Because as people, contrary to fish from this famous joke, we really experience our environment. And in fact, I've been saying it many times to the real estate folks, that experience is the actual product of real estate business, because that's the space in which we do all the things we do, especially in the Nordic countries. And according to a study that I don't have the source to in this slide, we spend over 90% of time indoors. So it really matters how the urban environment shapes us and how we can shape the urban environment. According to the UN forecast, by the year 2050, 70% of the world's population is going to live in the cities, and the urbanization is, of course, is an ongoing process. The Earth increased its population with over 2.3 billion people over the last 35 years. Here's an example of a Chinese province that grew from 73,000 people in 1984 to a population of over 2 million today. So, of course, the population growth is happening in cities, and even though the Earth is a very vast rock in space, we humans only inhabit these small condensed points, which is our urban environment, and that's really our human habitat. Recently, the technology has brought a lot of change into how we communicate, how we do work, and it has changed a lot how we experience our work and everyday life. And of course, the present-day communication devices turned the whole, basically turned any city into an office. It was predicted by many people. Here's a quote from Frank Duffy, an infamous British architect who coined the concept of shearing layers, and I'll talk about it in a few seconds. Seeing how the information technology and communication evolved, he predicted that there will be no offices in the future. And we have seen, of course, the change everybody has experienced in the past couple of years, but we also can notice that buildings don't change so fast. So they can change in shape, but the concept kind of stays the same. We got co-working places, but there's still workstations in them. And so, especially if we take the construction industry, it hasn't changed for hundreds of years, and it's a very difficult and a very conservative industry to change. So another prediction that was made by Buckminster Fuller, who was the hero's hero, and he was referred to many times by Stuart Brand, whom I mentioned earlier. So back in the 30s, he formulated this infamous thought that there's something patently insane about all the typewriters sleeping with all the beautiful plumbing in beautiful office buildings and all the people sleeping in the slums. And you would think that, of course, with this level of insight, the humanity would step into the future, understanding what the previous speaker spoke about our responsibility to future generations and so on. And the future has come, and it's not evenly distributed still, as a famous saying goes. And the use of space that has been the primary focus of the real estate industry is questioned, because if we only target efficiency, then the slums are actually the most efficient way to organize urban habitat. It's cheap to maintain. It has zero vacancy, right? And it's very easy to bring up. And so here's a comparison of an Indian residential sector and comparison to Helsinki, where I'm from. So 1 million people occupy 2 square kilometers of slums area versus 1 million people occupying 8 square kilometers of modern office space in Helsinki. And obviously, being a more desirable environment, it is still quite vacant. So currently, there's over 1 million square meters of these buildings sitting vacant. So obviously, there is a certain adaptation process that is going on. Cities change through a process that is called gentrification. Certain gray areas are pushed away to the outskirts of the cities, and old factory buildings are turned into lofts. We all see that in our European cities. Recently, especially after COVID, repurposing of buildings is a process that has been quite actively progressing. Here's an example of an infamous prison in Helsinki that was turned into a hotel a few years back, but it's a pretty sound example of repurposing. And so coming back to Frank Duffy, whom I mentioned earlier, and the shearing layers, and Stuart Brand. So in his book, How Buildings Learn, Stuart Brand adapted the concept of shearing layers that was formulated by Frank Duffy. And the idea of the shearing layers concept is that a building has a number of these abstract layers that represents the lifetime span of how frequently we can update certain parts of the building, right? So of course the land or the land site is the slowest one to change, if ever, and then comes the structural elements, then comes the facade or the skin, service layer, HVAC, different wiring that is installed inside, space, meaning layout, floor carpeting and so on, and stuff that is sitting inside the buildings, furniture, desks, and so on. And so I'm going to pay attention to the service layer, because this is a main part of the building that can be influenced, and where we can accelerate adoption of innovation using technology, using APIs. So what this service layer includes is basically an engineering infrastructure of a building that operates and helps us establish the purpose of the building. So we usually talk about the energy systems, the low voltage, plumbing, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, hoisting equipment like elevators, escalators, and so on. And so if we take a look at how these systems are controlled and operated, there are certain protocols that have been used in our industry over decades, including very famous ones like BuckNet, for example, or KNX. And recently there has been a surge in so-called PropTech startups, which are trying to reorganize and revolutionize the industry. And they're all feeding off of these smart building management systems, or not so smart building management systems, but anyway, systems that are capturing data that are in place inside buildings. And if we put an API wrapper around this, we can think of buildings more as operational systems where we can install hardware, install software, and turn buildings into more malleable structures that can respond better to our changing needs as customers, as users. And if we think on a broader scale, buildings are a very unique piece of our infrastructure because they are powered, they are very well equipped with energy, with different devices that can form a mesh network, and they do not need any central server to operate. So we can rely on buildings as edge part of our infrastructure that we're building. And we can think of cities as mesh networks of these buildings that are interconnected and can exchange information with one another, but can also exchange information with vehicles, handheld devices, drones, and other infrastructural elements that exist in a city. It's important to realize that it's not easy to work in our industry because buildings are not serial products like phones or cars. They are very individual. They can be compared more to people than things. And this is an example from Frankfurt. Two buildings designed by the same architect and constructed by the same crews, more or less, but and they look very comparatively. However, they are very different, and if you asked professional consultants to give a comparison of these buildings, they would not know the answer, because in order for us to understand how these building functions, how they operate, we would have to do a survey, we would have to do a due diligence process, we would have to go and dig into archives of documents and then inspect buildings with technical crews. So there's a lot of potential for us to, my intention today is to ignite interest towards this topic, because I know that there's a huge gap between the echo chamber that we create in the tech industry and the echo chamber that we create in a particular niche industry. So my take on that is that API-first solutions have enabled this hyper-personalization of everything. So through our smartphones, we are no longer just a physical person. We are a manifestation in many respects. We have our digital track record that is sitting with Google, that is sitting with GPS trackers, Wi-Fi sniffers, banking cards, payment behaviors, and of course our online presence is leaving a very thorough and very detailed digital trail. And I would encourage you to think of buildings in the same way. And if we put the building in the center, we can think about it as, first of all, from the design and construction standpoint, as a piece of equipment that is being brought up. Yeah, there are BIM models that are created during the construction stage. Then the property management part of life cycle of a building is when facility managers who service the building, who operate internally, do the cleaning, do the servicing of equipment, and property managers who look after the building as a whole, that it functions well, that all the service contracts are followed up on, and all the rents are collected. And then a building is also an investable asset, so we can look at it from the perspective of a building being a financial instrument that can be pledged, it can be valued, it can be bought and sold, and invested in, and managed as a financial asset. And we can think about the building as what I started with is an experience of the occupier, and we can think about all these different ways how we can make the space contained within the building more smart and more personalized. I would also like to quote Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, who said that the value of a vessel is not in the clay that it's made of, it's the value of a vessel is in the space within, and we can say the same about buildings. And we have seen a surge of these operator business models in real estate, where the building is no longer just square meters for rent, but it's a more holistic concept and different ways of monetization of human behavior, human attention, when the person is inside the building. So again, my intention was to simply highlight how APIs, through interoperability, through all the integrations that we can bring to the table today with our existing technologies, can really challenge the status quo of the real estate industry. And in my session 4 years ago, I spoke about tokenization, but I was maybe too optimistic, too quick, and maybe we'll leave it for next year, hopefully. Meanwhile, please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to continue this discussion in private afterwards. Thank you very much for your attention.